Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today on this LinkedIn Live, a very short conversation. Absolutely delighted to be joined by Esme Jones from Trees for Cities. We're going to be talking through a few things around urban greening, around awareness to action, and around engaging and motivating people to take positive, sustainable steps. So yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us today, Esme.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on.
So I've got a few questions for you, and I know that we'll probably go off with a few tangents, and there might be some follow-up questions. But I think first of all, we'd love to hear just little bit about yourself, about what you do for Trees for Cities. And I know that you've spent over a decade in the charity sector, and I'd be curious to what draws you to that sector, and the reasons why we've stayed there for so long.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think I started off my career in digital marketing agencies and creative agencies and things like that, and ended up working for a lot of charity clients. And this was a long time ago, so kind of 15 years ago, and loved what all these charities were doing, and did quite a lot of work on environmental projects, and then got really frustrated that I wasn't on the kind of client side actually working within the charity. And it's often a bit frustrating if you're working on an agency and you can only change and control certain things. So that's when I started to kind of feel my way into the charity sector, which is often quite hard to kind of get into, and work for some smaller charities and then work my way up. And I've worked for lots of different organisations, healthcare, worked at Bernardo's before, Trees for Cities. I've worked on children's issues and children's rights, and now I'm working for Trees for Cities, and I have been desperate to work for an environmental organisation for a long time, mostly because I've done a lot of volunteering in the environmental sector. So I felt so pleased when I got this job, because I'm able to actually practice what I preach with my friends all the time. Very annoying, talking on about sustainability and the environment. So that's been a real pleasure to kind of actually work in the environmental sector and hopefully make some really good change. And what has kept me here is, I think we're living in a really, really difficult time. We all know that. The kind of global stage is a mess. But the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, which are really justice issues, are all connected, and they are so prevalent. And I feel a bit, without sounding too righteous, it's kind of, we all have a bit of a moral duty to make change. And so if you can do that for your job, even better. So that's what really draws me in. I've got 2 little girls. I feel increasingly worried about their future. And so that's what really keeps me here and keeps me doing this work. And people working in the charity sector now are having a tough time. And I sort of want to give them all a bit of a shout out to cling on and keep going, because you're fighting the good fight. So yeah, that's what really keeps me here.
No, that's fantastic to hear, and I think that that the passion that you have there certainly shines through. And I think thinking about Trees for Cities, thinking about that point there you made about climate justice as well. When we talk about Trees for Cities, we talk about urban trees, green spaces, urban greening. Why should people care about that, and especially those living in cities who might not think about it from day to day?
Yeah, so over 80% of us in the UK live in towns and cities. So it's most of us, and a lot of people watching this will relate to that. And as we know, things are getting worse and worse for towns and cities, and they will do over the coming years. We're not adapting fast enough to the changes that are happening for our planet. So our cities are getting hotter. They're more likely to flood. Our air pollution is really not good, as we know, and we need to try and sequester, so get rid of as much carbon as possible. So every single tree that we have in our towns and cities, they're working incredibly hard to support us and to mitigate lots of those things. And the green spaces that we have as well are so crucial, really, to our survival over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So some of the big issues, I suppose, that those trees are working so hard to fight are obviously cleaning our air. We know in our towns and cities, especially on busy high streets, sadly around schools and in places where vulnerable people live, that air quality is not what it should be. So the more green space and the more trees that we can get, fabulous. Flood risk is a really, really big issue. And I know we've seen earlier this year, my street, I live in London, was flooded this year, and it never has been before. And you can see on one side of the street where there are trees, there are fewer puddles because the trees are working really hard to soak up excess rainwater. And in towns and cities creating a flat surface, the tree roots are doing really well to absorb water quickly. So the trees are very important from perspective. Wildlife, they give a home to wildlife and nature in the city. Birds, insects, squirrels, although they're sometimes pests, all these animals and the insect life are benefiting from those trees. But the really big thing is that trees make us feel, and green spaces make us feel really good. There's loads of evidence to say that when we go out into a park or we're literally near trees, we feel better, we feel calmer, children feel calmer. And they're great for connecting people as well. So seeing other people out in the park. And I think that's the one big thing that we never really stop and think about, that, if it's a sunny day, we want to go and sit in the park with a picnic, don't we? And it makes us feel really good. So yeah, they're all the reasons that we need to protect green space, but crucially create more of it and reimagine our city where we couldn't, we might look at a street and think, there's no space for trees there. There's no space for more green space, but you can really creatively inject that greenery into a street with kind of flower boxes, trees in unusual places, green walls, all that kind of thing. So, look up and look at that tree on your street the next time you're on your way to work or whatever, and sort of think about its superpowers, because it's working very hard for you.
Yeah, I think the superpower. I think that's a really nice way of framing it, because clearly from the list you've taken us through there, just a huge amount of stuff that put that green space, positive reasons why that green space is good. No, it's fantastic, and I think the urban flooding is something that we've come across recently as well, right? So doing some work with Camden, thinking around turning London into this idea of a sponge city. There's been so much urbanization, people are contributing to it via astroturfing their gardens, putting paving in for a new parking space in the front garden, and it's creating these impermeable surfaces, faster storm runoff, doesn't drain away as quickly. So this idea of kind of urban greening is a really, really refreshing antidote to some of those problems, and the real cornerstone for sponge city. And then from a human perspective, what's the gap between people being aware of climate issues, around being aware of some of those things you've just been talking there about tree superpowers, and what's the difference between their awareness and what they're actually doing around it, and what they need to be doing around it?
Yeah, this is I feel like I could talk all day about this, because if we had the answer to it, the exact answer, we just crack on and do it, wouldn't it? Or didn't we? But it's complicated. So some of the big things on a kind of macro level are that we know that, I think there was some research that came out at the end of 2025, a global study that talked about the fact that over 89% of people across the world are concerned about the climate, and they want to see more being done. And biodiversity, they can see there's an issue. They want their governments and they want public bodies to make those changes. But the big thing holding them back is that they don't believe that their peers agree with them. So there's this problem with actually talking about the climate and biodiversity crisis. And so this kind of like conversation gulf is actually often preventing us from taking that awareness and to actually doing something about it, because we can't see our family, friends doing very much about it. So that's one of the prevailing things that I hear and see, and is evidence. And then, but then we've got wonderful people, haven't we, in the UK talking about these issues, like Dave Attenborough, Chris Packham, and they're trusted voices. We've got, sometimes the media is quite good at talking about it. We've got a whole raft of organisations like Trees for Cities, much bigger organisations talking about these problems. But I think that one of the reasons that people are prevented from taking action is because it's not easy enough. We're so busy. We're so overwhelmed by these issues. We're so kind of head down, crack on with the day. We can't really find an easy way to make the change. The other thing is that people are they're often disenfranchised because they believe that the action that they might take is not actually going to help. It's not actually going to amount to enough change to combat these massive problems. So there's another psychological barrier there. And I think the other thing is just people being sort of I don't know, being a person who might make a change for the environment is kind of like they don't put themselves in that box. They think, oh, that's for people who want to protest or whatever, all that kind of stuff. So it's our job as organisations like Trees for Cities and others to give people hopeful, easy to action, impactful ways they can support that actually show change. And it's wonderful working at Trees for Cities because the main thing that we do is plant trees with people and with communities, and it's a very active, hopeful, instant change that you can see and you've felt, and you can see that tree is going to grow for the rest of its life. But those barriers I talked about, they're the biggest ones. And I think people also need to see people in power making change, because often our actions can feel insignificant, and they've got to see politicians and big organizations and companies making those changes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about the action that Trees for Cities take. What are the most impactful things that Trees for Cities are doing right now?
Yeah, so we do what it says on the tin. We plant trees in towns and cities, and the most impactful thing that we do is we focus on planting in areas of what we call low tree equity. So what that means is places in the UK that don't have lots of trees and canopy cover is what we call it, and also have other problems. So those areas are most likely to be affected by the effects of climate change and biodiversity change. They might have socioeconomic issues, but crucially, they don't have enough trees for the people living there to support them to live healthy lives. So some of the most impactful things that we do is we go to those places and we work with communities to work out and map out where we should be planting trees and kind of what other green initiatives we can create. And then we get planting, and we can transform somewhere from being quite grey and bleak to a place where people get together and they talk and they own the trees and they look after them. And that is really what we do year in, year out. We've done that for over 30 years. And some of our projects are very small, some are very big, but that's by far the most impactful kind of action that we take. And we work a lot with children as well. And when we go to a school, for example, and we do a lot of work on schools that have playgrounds that flood every year, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And we've done a lot of work in schools along the Thames River bed. And what we'll do in a school is we'll go in, and our amazing kind of landscaping team will look at the setup of the school. And lots of Victorian schools have very flat, concreted, large paving or cement playgrounds, and we'll reimagine that space to have sunken flower beds, trees that are amazing water absorbers, and we make that playground accessible and usable for children when it's too hot in the summer and it's flooded in the winter. And it's those kind of really impactful case studies that they make me smile and make me feel really happy, because those hundreds of kids are now outside and playing and experiencing wildlife and nature in a way that they just didn't have before. So yeah. Oh, sorry, I lost you for a minute, Josh.
Yeah. I think we're both. I think we're there. I think we're back on air, back live. I'm not sure what happened. But yeah, that case study I think was fantastic. That's the student playground work, and I think there's so many benefits, right? That sort of, as you say, the reduced flood risk, cool shaded spaces to play in the heat of summer, which we know is going to get worse and worse, especially in urban heat islands as well. And then obviously responsibility that you have for that engagement and marketing for Trees and Cities. What do you think about what actually motivates people to move from caring to doing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So some of those points I talked about before, we've got these big barriers where people don't feel that they can their action's not actually going to add up to anything, or they can't see the impact of the action. So I think some of the most important things that we need to think about as engagement or marketing professionals is always going to be, you know, who's the audience that you're trying to reach and what makes them tick. And what we try to do at Choose the Cities is to meet people where they are. So, and we do that on different levels. When we're doing kind of wide scale marketing to the general public, we've tested lots of different things out, and we always find that a message of hope performs better for us than a message of doom and gloom. Yes. Imagining what the future could look like if that person takes a change, and what their change might kind of, if lots of people make the change, what will the big change add up to? That always kind of works better for us. Humor works really, really well for us to engage people online, especially, and to make it relative and relatable. So talk about things in a way that people are going to understand. You know, if they have kids, they're going to care about their child's walk to school and it not being polluted. So talk to them about that to get them to take action. Or if they have, you know, an older person in their family that they're worried about because of air pollution, talk to them about that. Health, heat, you know, they're all connectable conversations that we can start off with people. On the kind of community engagement side, the best way we found to kind of motivate people to take action is to help them to take ownership of the place they live in and talk to them about what issues they're experiencing in that place that they live, and to help, you know, get their opinion on what we should do in terms of tree planting and changing the space that they live in. So we work very, very hard to do really deep community engagement. We work with schools, local groups, we knock on doors, we talk to people, and that really helps to get them out, you know, in a few weekends time and get them actually planting the trees. And we often have people coming out on planting days with us who have never planted a tree before. They've never held a spade and dug into the ground and held a little sapling, and that's really, really wonderful to see that. And it motivates them forever. It's a lifelong kind of action that they take, which stays with them. It's kind of a core memory that stays with them, and encourages them to look after the trees they've planted and to take more action in the future.
Well, I suppose there's this amazing kind of physical presence in what they're doing, because they can come back, you know, if they've planted a tree or the section of trees, they can come back year after year and physically watch it grow, and I'm sure that's incredibly rewarding. So that's great to hear. And I think, you know, what you said earlier about that awareness action gulf, right? That sort of getting people to step over, to go from being aware that we think that most people are, to actually taking action. And I think, some of those examples of, you know, meeting people where they are, being hyper specific, hyper focused into what motivates them. I think those are, you know, winning combinations. What we do at Team Jump, we think about behavior change, we think about encouraging people to take positive steps. You know, what we're always trying to reaffirm with people, and we're always trying to stress to them, is how lots of little actions add up, right? So lots of little actions can create a huge impact at scale, and the scale doesn't have to be thousands of people. That scale can be you and your family, it can be you and your colleagues, it can be you and, you know, your network. So really, really powerful stuff. And then for Choose the Cities and your work with perhaps with other organizations, I know you kind of host planting days and get people to do kind of corporate volunteering and things like that as well. What do you see within organizations who are using the services or helping out, and when they're trying to mobilize people around sustainability, what mistakes do you think that organizations stumble across when trying to engage people with that work?
Yeah, so it's really difficult, because depending on the group of people you're trying to engage and motivate, they often need completely different sort of levers, don't they? And you know, as you all know, there are some people who are already desperate to make a change. They just need a little nudge in the right direction, and they'll take an action and they'll be happy about it and they'll do it again. There are some people who just don't care and will never care. But it's the people in the middle that are a bit tougher to kind of engage and nudge to take a change. So some of the mistakes, and you know, I've made them in the past myself, is to kind of, I think sometimes talking about sustainability in the round, it can sometimes just sound a bit like changing a light bulb to kind of be more energy efficient, or not eating meat once a week or something like that.
Yeah,
I think
doing a bit of recycling.
Which sadly we all know they're really important, but they're not going to add to the change that we need. So I think that some of the mistakes people make are they don't lead with hope, and they don't really create that vision of what the change, collective or individual, is actually going to add up to. And there isn't a value exchange with the person. There's not a kind of, this is going to make you feel better, or this is actually going to help you in the long run. There isn't that kind of imagination piece. And there's also a lack of storytelling, I think, often about why something might affect a person now and their family in the future and all the people that they love, and why we really need to make a change now. And I think some of that is coming through politics more and more in a really, really good way, actually, at the moment, about sort of meeting people where they are, talking about the problems that affect them in society and how the environment can actually help them. And that's a really interesting, positive tool, I think. So yeah, one of the big mistakes are not talking about the hopeful vision, not talking about how impactful things can be. And yeah, I think the other thing is, if you're doing community engagement, which is obviously not the kind of the mass mobilization.
We lost you there for a second, but you're back. Don't worry.
I'm back. Yeah. The big piece is around, you've got to ask people what they want and how they want the change to happen and what action is going to suit them the best. Because lots of people just don't have the time to make certain actions. If you have a very busy job, you could work nights, or you've got other things happening in your life, you've got to make it an easy action for them to take that's relevant to them.
I think the point there about adding value, right? You want to, yes, you want to set out a vision. Yes, you want to set out the positive impact that individuals can have, but also you want to demonstrate to the user what additional value they are going to get as people, which which will happen because of what the work they're going to be doing, or what they could be doing. I think that's really important. No, that's fantastic. I think that's absolutely right. I think that's the perfect kind of approach. And I think lots of organizations who might be listening today and who are thinking about doing this sort of thing, I think there's some really wise words there about what they can be doing to help position this sort of work internally and with colleagues across their networks.
Sorry, I was going to just add another little bit, if that's okay. I think the other thing is that we are living in this slightly strange time where I think people are aware of what's happening with the environment, biodiversity, and the kind of rights issues across the world. But I think often organizations, they might need to start with some of the basics sometimes about what's actually scientifically happening. And I think I'm sure you've had this kind of penny drop thing, but I think for me, it happened 5 or 6 years ago, where I went to a talk actually at a kind of university, and I was looking at this big graph of kind of global temperature going up, and then with a big line which is humans can't survive when we hit 5 degrees of global warming, whatever. And it was at that point where I was kind of thinking, okay, this is really bad, and that really drove my action. And it's not going to be the same for everyone, but I do think that's missing a lot, the truth about how bad things are. And I think on that scale of where people are on their kind of climate journey, it is sometimes necessary to talk about those things, to nudge people into action. Not always, but I think it's something for people to consider, and a lot for companies to really consider. It's not about education, but it's about talking about the facts and getting us to be comfortable with talking about these things as they are, and how dramatic they are, and how frightening they are. So yeah, just another thought that is interesting.
Yeah, and I think I've noticed late last year at the National Emergency Briefing, yes, and I think that's now starting to circulate into community groups, and being kind of the video excerpt from that is now being circulated and started to go out in some great fundamental places. I'd love to see that kind of cut through some of the noise and to get more public awareness, because I think that contains some really great updated science. And
it's amazing.
Some of those stats you probably saw 5 years ago, they haven't got any better, have they? They're not going the right way.
And I think if the National Emergency Briefing can be adopted into organisations and something people play, but as we know, it the problem is lots of companies are, you know, supporting some of the issues that are failing. So it's really, really difficult. But you know, I think if the public can take it upon themselves to watch that as well and get used to some of those facts, it would be, yeah, really helpful and interesting to see how people respond to it.
Yeah. There's one that we're watching very carefully at the moment, certainly. Great. And then a lot of people often, you know, we talk about climate, we talk about biodiversity crisis, talk about climate crisis, talk about climate emergency. You know, it can be very overwhelming for individuals. It can be sort of head in the sand moments for lots of people. It can be people don't want to engage with it because it's too scary, too much. Have you got any tips on how you can turn that overwhelming feelings into something positive and actionable?
I have. So I think my 3 things are, number 1, and I will do a plug for the urban trees in a minute, but number 1 is just get outside. You know, I do this often if I'm working from home, and I think I've just got to reply to these emails, I've just got to do this thing. If I go out into the garden, I'm very lucky to have a garden, but you know, if you go out onto your street, you walk towards some green space, you will feel better. It instantly calms your nervous system down, and it just helps. And I think an action you can take to stop you feeling overwhelmed by some of these issues is to find out what people are doing in your area. It might be planting urban orchards, it might be a tree planting day, it might be improving where you live with some little, you know, plant sort of pots at the end of your road or whatever, and just spending time with other people who also care and are also worried that you could have a conversation with. That are often not your friends and family. I mean, hanging out with your friends and family is great, but speaking with other people about your concerns about this very, very big, scary thing we're all facing makes you feel so much better. And if you're using your hands to plant something, it's a very primitive thing, but it makes you feel so much better. However small that action is, the time you spend outside, it really, really helps. So that's the number 1 thing. The second thing is come and plant a tree with Trees for Cities, or support us with your voice or time. We've got a big strategy launching in a couple of weeks where we're going to be giving people more actions, because we know not everybody can get out to a planting day from an accessibility point of view, lots of reasons. So, and we will only plant trees during the winter as well. So we, you know, but there are loads of other actions people can take. They can water trees, they can speak to their MP or the local representative about trees and green spaces. So yeah, we'll be asking people to support us in lots of new exciting ways over the next few years, which I'm really, really excited about. And I think the third thing that people can do that is really powerful is write to your local MP. You just talk about why you want green spaces, why it's important, because we know that local representatives don't get enough sort of pressure on these things. So again, it's, as you said, it might feel small, you might not get a reply for weeks and weeks, but you will have made your voice heard, and it's a very small but kind of mighty action you can take.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those fantastic examples, and yeah, some really clear actions that individuals can take. And yeah, I think that's great to hear. Great. Well, fantastic. Esme, thank you ever so much for your time. Really, really interesting, really fascinating, and some really great takeaways for anyone who's joined us today for this live conversation. Really appreciate your time, and yeah, good luck, and look forward to seeing the Trees for Cities strategy, that, you know, the new projects you got planned. And yeah, hopefully, I mean, Team Jump, Trees for Cities have kind of worked together for many years now, so it's yeah, it's great to see how we can also support each other. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh. Lovely to chat.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Bye.